Welcome to our Wednesday night Bible study. We call this Grace Forward because what we do is we take the sermon and we move a bit forward into the message, go a little deeper from the weekend service. And today we're going to be digging a bit deeper into the story from Mark chapter 4 that Pastor Kathleen preached about this past weekend, where Jesus and his disciples are caught in a storm. And it's one of the great stories. We'll talk about storms a little bit here in a moment. Hey, while people are catching up to get online with us, just want to remind you, depending on when you're watching this, on Saturday, September 12th at 5 o'clock, we're going to be having our live stream service, and we're going to have live bodies in the building. And if you haven't had a chance yet to RSVP and you want to be here for our first reopening service, you go to boldrecklessgrace.org/reopening. boldrecklessgrace.org/reopening. There's a little link there for you to RSVP, and we do that so that we can make sure that we keep everybody socially distanced. We'd love to have you here if you want to join us. Otherwise, we will be online. So again, boldrecklessgrace.org/reopening, and you're going to find there also a couple videos on what it will look like to come to church. We have a short video on how to do communion if you come here to the building. So everything you need to know right there, boldrecklessgrace.org/reopening. All right, we're going to look a little bit deeper at the story of Jesus and the storms. And let me read for you from Mark chapter 4. That day when evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let's go over to the other side." We're going to come back to that next weekend, by the way. Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along, just as he was in the boat, and there were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." All right, before we dive a little deeper, I think our band would like to sing a song for you.
I thank the Lord for what He's done in us. I thank the Lord for His love. I thank the Lord for what He's gonna do in us from the heavens above. I thank the Lord for the smile that He's put on my face. I thank the Lord for His grace. I thank the Lord for the joy that He's given to me, 'cause I know that I'm really set free. Everybody, everybody, everybody praise the Lord. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Everybody, everybody, everybody praise the Lord. Come on, come on, come on. Everybody, everybody, everybody praise the Lord. Yeah, yeah. Everybody, everybody, everybody praise the Lord. Everybody, everybody, everybody praise the Lord. Yeah. Everybody, everybody, everybody praise the Lord. Come on, come on, come on. Yeah. Everybody, everybody, everybody praise the Lord. Yeah, yeah. Everybody, everybody, everybody praise the Lord. Everybody praise the Lord.
Thank you, band. I think Patrick's going to be back with us next weekend playing guitar. It'd be good to have him and, of course, have you with us online or here in the building. When I read a story like this about storms, I think probably like you do of some of the storms that I've been in. And I've been in some good ones. The first storm that I can remember was when I was a kid back in Minneapolis, living in St. Louis Park, Minnesota. And it was a tornado warning. And I probably had been through some before that, but this is the one I remember the most. And I remember being outside, and the sky just very, very quickly started to turn not just black, but this deep green color. And sirens started going off. And I remember one of my friends, he knew exactly what that meant. I didn't. He knew what that meant, and he was so scared he ran, and he leaped over a fence without touching it and ran home. And we could hear parents all over the neighborhood calling us, getting the kids home as fast as they can. And we ran into the house and down into the basement, and we spent hours down there listening to the wind blowing around us. Had WCCO radio, 830 AM on, and just listening. And they just, one report after another, tornado sighting here, tornado sighting there. And thankfully, we didn't have a tornado around us, although we had really strong winds. But not too far from us in Fridley, Minnesota, the tornado had gone through, and it was a devastating one. We had people in our family who lived in that area. Diane just raised her hand, said she was there at the time. And that was one of the storms that those of us who were living at that time remember. It was a vicious, fierce cell of storms that came through almost instantly. Of course, then the other extreme when you're living in Minnesota is not just your summer tornadoes, it's your winter blizzards. And we went through a few of those, and one year in particular, Jeff and I were working at a gas station not too far from our home. And it was a blizzard. They told people not to go out at all. And so we called the boss and we said, we can stay home, right? We're going to keep the station closed. He said, oh no, you're going to go down there and sell gas. So we put a TV in the back of our car, convinced that nobody was going to be there. We plugged the TV in, and as soon as we opened the door, it was non-stop business. I don't know what it is about blizzards and people thinking they need to go out and be in the blizzard, but we had people coming in, and they were getting their cars filled up. And one guy just sort of appeared carrying a gas can out of the snow and the blowing stuff. He'd run out of gas about 3 miles away and had walked all the way in the snow, in the blizzard, to get to our gas station because we were one of the only ones open. And he starts walking back, and I said, no, there's no way he can do that. So I got in we had a station wagon at the time. It was a beast. It could do anything. And so I drove him to his place, and I was outside for about 3 minutes putting gas in the car. My whole face had turned bright white from the cold, and my hands were freezing. It was freezing. People just coming out for gas in the middle of a blizzard. Of course, we had a wind shear here. It must have been back. That was here in Phoenix back in the early 90s, I think. We had just moved into our new home. And it was in the Glendale area in particular it was hit, and I went driving down afterwards down Union Hills, past 51st Avenue, 43rd Avenue, and trees down and power lines down. It was a huge storm. We had tiles blown off of our roof, a tree blown over. We have a basement home, so our instinct was to hit the basement. Hit the basement, it was what we did. And then one other one, just because we're talking about storms here. Jan and I and Jeff and Diane had a trip planned to the Bahamas, and there was a warning out that there was a hurricane coming toward the Bahamas. And we were pretty sure they'd cancel our flight, but no, they said, well, we're going to get in just before the hurricane. Great, that's what we want to do, is vacation in a hurricane. We get to our hotel, and it's already blowing all over the place. We get to our hotel, and they had closed, and were sending all of their people over to the Atlantis Hotel. Maybe you've seen those commercials for Atlantis in the Bahamas. And they put us up on the top floor. We're about 40 stories up in a hurricane. And we could see the toilet water swishing back and forth. We could feel the building blowing. And they said, well, if it gets really strong, we'll come and wake you up and bring you downstairs. Well, it turns out that it missed us. It bypassed the Bahamas because we never got the wake-up call. But it did cause some devastation. It was a windy storm. So I've sort of been through a lot of different storms in my life. And that doesn't count, of course, the emotional storms and the economic storms we've been through. And the disciples in our story have gone through such a storm. Now, our disciples in this story, they're no strangers to these kind of storms. We've talked many times here before that because of the way the Sea of Galilee sits, and it's not a sea, it's a lake, but it's a huge lake, and it's surrounded by these large hills or mountains, and when the wind comes down and the cold wind hits the warm wind of the water, it can turn into an instant storm, and it still happens to this day. So the disciples are used to that, but there was something about this storm that was different, because these experienced fishermen were panicked. And they were panicked not only because of the storm itself, but because some of their ancient fears came back to life. The old ancient stories said that evil lurked in the waters, and that when the waters were churned up, it was evil, it was the devil. And so they had this sense, this deep primal fear that evil was out to get them. Not just the physical storm, but a spiritual storm as well. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 pictures the beginning of creation, and it talks about the sea, and it's pictured of this restless, powerful, chaotic void. And it seemed to be, in Genesis 1, a power that threatened God's good creation. And so all of these stories that the Jewish people grew up with, the Hebrews grew up with, the ancients grew up with, came back to life in the midst of that kind of fierce storm. The evil, chaotic powers were churning in that water and threatening to take them down. So they're fighting for their lives because of the sheer power of the physical storm, and they're fighting for their souls because of their belief that in that moment, evil is out to get them. So they're scared. Now, it's easy for us to sort of poo-poo that fear, that primal fear of storms, and say, well, that's just an ancient belief. But even to this day, we still sort of have this sense when a storm hits that there's something evil brewing. It can create fear not just physically, but internally. We can talk about the monster of a storm. We can talk about the devastations it's going to cause. And so we use all of these kinds of words that not only speak physically about a storm, but speak about the intent behind a storm, so to speak. So these guys, they're facing a tornado, they're facing a blizzard, they're facing a hurricane, and they're scared for their lives. Meanwhile, in the story, Jesus is completely oblivious to everything that's going on. He's sleeping in the back of the boat. And you got to believe he's drenched, because the water is pouring in all over the place. So something's going on with Jesus. Part of the way that we can interpret that is that he is exhausted. He's been healing people, he's been speaking to people, he's just exhausted. And maybe you've had that experience before where you slept through anything and everything because you were just dead to the world. And maybe that was the thing for Jesus. Maybe Jesus just didn't worry about the storm because he knew God had it. Because part of what Genesis 1:1 teaches is that even though this chaos and this void seemed out of control and seemed to be a power that would destroy creation, God proved to be more powerful than that chaotic void. And maybe Jesus was sleeping knowing that God was more powerful than the storm. Whatever reason, Jesus is sound asleep. And the disciples were verklempt, upset that Jesus was sleeping, in part because they were so afraid and they knew Jesus could help them. But they're wondering why Jesus didn't seem to care. Don't you care that this storm is going to kill us? And how many times have we been in situations where we're hurting, we're broken, we're grieving, and we've asked that question, Jesus, where are you? Why have you abandoned me? Don't you care that I'm hurting? Don't you care that I've lost my job? Don't you care that my dad or my mom is sick and they're dying? Don't you care that I have cancer and it's going to take my life away? Don't you care? Because Jesus seems to be sleeping on the job. We've all had that experience. And the disciples are in the midst of that experience right now. So Jesus, they wake him up. He gets up. He rebukes the storm. He speaks to the storm. And he says, quiet. Be still. And then the wind died down and was completely calm. Now imagine being in that boat with those disciples and you see the fierce power of that storm. You see the physical power of that storm and you see the spiritual power of that storm. And Jesus stands up and he speaks to that power. And with just a couple words, instantly, the storm is gone and everything is calm. It's no wonder the last verse of that story says they were terrified. Because in that boat, in that moment, was a power greater than any power they had ever seen before. And they were awed, they were shocked, they were terrified, and probably in that terror was a deep sense of respect. And they asked the question, who is this guy that just did what we saw? They saw a power unleashed out of Jesus that they'd never seen before or heard before. And the good news of the story is that power of Jesus is for you. He's on your side. He's there in the storm with you. And you've heard the story before. Sometimes he calms the storm. Sometimes he calms us in the storm. But really the point of the story is this. No matter what we're going through in life, Jesus is there in the boat with us. And he's got you. He's got your back. The storm may continue. Life may still be difficult, but you don't go through it alone. And that's what hope is, to know that you're not alone, that the power of the universe is there with you and will somehow in some way use his grace to get you through that moment to the life that God has for you. Again, it doesn't solve all the problems because, as we're going to see next week, they stepped out of the frying pan into the oven. But Jesus was there as well. So part of the story is that Jesus is there with us in the storm. But there's another part of the story, and we're going to look at this coming weekend now and in our Bible study next week. They were in the boat to go somewhere. And Jesus was heading somewhere, and he was heading there for an important reason. And we'll talk more about that next weekend. So, as you go through the week, remember, Jesus is in the boat with you. And the power of the Creator is there alongside of you. Thanks for joining us. If you want to share this with your friends, please do that. And remember, if you want to be with us this weekend in the building, boldrecklessgrace.org/reopening. boldrecklessgrace.org/reopening. And it's really important that you RSVP because in order for us to make sure that we're all physically distanced and safe, we have to keep the attendance to a certain level. And if you don't have that RSVP, we probably aren't going to be able to let you in. So please, RSVP, we'd love to have you. If you can't make it or if you don't feel like you're ready to come to worship, that's okay. The service that we do Saturday with people in the building is the service that you're going to see on Facebook and YouTube. We're going to start adding in some live pieces again. So everything we experience here, you're going to experience at home. So whether you're home or here in the building, we're going to worship together this weekend. Looking forward to seeing you. Thanks for joining us. Remember to share this with a friend. Have a good week.